Apparently, love used to be so overwhelming that people happily risked jail time, disease, or public humiliation just to impress someone who barely made eye contact. And somehow, those weren't even the worst ideas humanity came up with. 1. Faking one's death has always been a bold romantic gesture, but a certain love-struck Renaissance poet took it to Olympic levels of stupidity by staging his own dramatic passing, just to see whether his crush would cry. The plan involved him lying motionless on a tavern floor covered in stale wine and flour for realism, while his friends wailed like discount actors. Unfortunately for him, the object of his affection arrived, looked down, and announced loudly that she was not surprised, given his lifestyle, then immediately asked the bartender whether she could have his unpaid tab transferred to someone else. He sprang up in panic, trying to salvage the moment, which only resulted in her screaming because nothing says romance like your corpse coming back for a second opinion. The entire spectacle proved only one thing. If someone doesn't like you when you're alive, pretending to be dead rarely improves the situation. 2. Nothing captures the spirit of ill-advised devotion like the nobleman who attempted to serenade a woman outside her window using a borrowed lute he had absolutely no idea how to play, and somehow managed to turn a simple chord progression into what sounded like a maritime disaster happening in real time. Determined to salvage the moment, he climbed onto a stack of wine crates for dramatic height, which immediately collapsed because gravity does not negotiate with romantics. The crash woke half the neighborhood and sent him sprawling into a pile of expensive imported fruit, creating the world's first documented romantic concussion. The woman eventually opened her window, saw a bruised stranger clutching a lute like a wounded animal, and politely asked him to leave before the city guard added public noise violations to his personal tragedies. The moral was painfully clear. If someone needs music to fall in love with you, make sure the soundtrack isn't a war crime. 3. Alchemy has always attracted the bold and the misguided, but one medieval scholar attempted the ultimate romantic upgrade by trying to brew a love elixir strong enough to make the woman he adored fall head over heels for him, except his recipe involved equal parts rose petals, crushed gemstones, and something described only as volatile spirit, which should never appear in a cooking context. When he presented the potion, it foamed like an angry sea monster and sprayed across the table, narrowly missing the ceiling. The woman, wisely cautious, refused to drink it, but he insisted by taking a sip first, which resulted in him sprinting into the courtyard screaming about feeling the universe rearrange itself, while nearby goats scattered for safety. Witnesses recorded that his eyebrows disappeared instantly, his robe fused into a permanent toga, and his romantic target left quietly with the statement, "I prefer men who don't ignite during conversation." The world learned that chemistry is attractive. Explosive chemistry is not. 4. There was once a noblewoman who believed the grandest declaration of affection was commissioning a tapestry depicting her beloved as a heroic warrior, except she had never actually seen him fight and only had secondhand descriptions to work with, resulting in a colossal woven mural showing him slaying a dragon, wrestling a bear, and holding a sword so large it could double as a bridge support. Naturally, he felt pressured to live up to the imagery and attempted to recreate one of the scenes by challenging a notoriously territorial swan at the local pond, because apparently he believed avian aggression was a manageable starting point. The swan proceeded to demolish his dignity, chasing him through the marketplace while he shrieked like a man experiencing emotional and physical betrayal. By the time the tapestry was unveiled, everyone in town already knew him as the one defeated by a bird, and the relationship quietly dissolved under the weight of unrealistic expectations. 5. A particularly ambitious baker once decided the path to winning a woman's heart was creating the largest heart-shaped bread loaf the kingdom had ever seen. But the attempt quickly escalated into a structural engineering crisis when the dough expanded to the size of a small cottage and began pushing open the bakery windows like a yeasty alien breakout. Determined not to quit, he climbed onto a stool to carve a romantic message into its surface, only to be swallowed waist-deep when the dough collapsed inward like a carbohydrate sinkhole. Townspeople rushed to free him as he shouted declarations of love from inside what looked like a gluten-based womb. The woman in question arrived only to ask if he had considered simply speaking to her instead of generating a bread-related natural disaster. She left with a polite nod, while he remained trapped until the dough cooled, giving the town the most absurd rescue event it had ever needed. 6. A love-struck apprentice once attempted to write the longest love letter his village had ever seen, believing sheer volume would compensate for lack of charm. He procured a massive roll of parchment big enough to upholster a castle hallway and began writing a rambling manifesto filled with metaphors so confusing they sounded like riddles written during a fever dream. 3 days in, he had used 200 feet of paper, 2 quills, and the patience of everyone who walked by. When he finally delivered the scroll, it unrolled down her front steps, across the street, and wrapped itself politely around a passing donkey. The woman attempted to read it, but gave up around the paragraph, comparing her to a candle melting toward destiny, but also possibly a ham. Locals noted that she did not respond, partly because she was overwhelmed, and partly because she simply did not have the weekend free to read something longer than most national constitutions. 7. Medieval fashion was a battlefield, and one hopeless romantic marched directly into it by crafting an extravagant suit decorated entirely with the initials of the woman he adored, covering every inch of fabric so thoroughly that he looked like a walking monogrammed quilt. Unfortunately, the event where he planned to unveil this masterpiece was a crowded feast, and guests kept mistaking him for a heraldic announcement, or worse, a particularly aggressive branding campaign. During dinner, he attempted a gallant bow, only for the oversized embroidered letters on his sleeves to catch on a chandelier chain, leaving him dangling like a festive banner. The woman stared in horror as he swung gently above the seating area, explaining that he had done it all for her. She eventually cut him down by discreetly blowing out a candle, causing the chain to drop him into the soup tureen. Love may be blind, but feasts are unforgiving. 8. Renaissance astrology inspired many questionable decisions, but none more so than the young man who became convinced that the stars demanded he confess his feelings at exactly midnight during a lunar alignment. He sprinted across town to reach her balcony in time, ignoring the fact that the city's guard dogs did not believe in astrology and absolutely believed in chasing nocturnal intruders. He arrived exhausted, clawed up the vines like a desperate squirrel, and breathlessly delivered a speech about cosmic destiny, only for her to explain that he had climbed the wrong balcony and was now serenading her elderly aunt, who had been asleep until moments prior. The real romantic interest peeked out from the balcony next door, watching him try to apologize while 2 guards hauled him down, still muttering about planetary orbits. As declarations of love go, it was both memorable and inadvisable, especially for someone with only marginal climbing skills. 9. A particularly determined suitor once attempted to win affection by performing a heroic rescue that absolutely no one requested, staging a fake perilous situation involving a runaway cart so he could dramatically intervene. He positioned himself on the street, shoved the empty cart down the hill, and prepared to leap in to stop it. Except the cart picked up significantly more speed than he predicted, barreled past his intended stopping point, and crashed spectacularly into a merchant's fruit stall. Rather than saving the day, he ended up being dragged along by one wheel, yelling apologies while a river of oranges made its bid for freedom. When his crush arrived, she found him half buried under citrus, being lectured by a furious vendor about property damage. She thanked him for the gesture, but clarified she preferred relationships that didn't require municipal cleanup. 10. Historical musicians often relied on flair, but one misguided romantic took it further by hiring an entire troupe of traveling performers to reenact the moment he supposedly fell in love at first sight, which he exaggerated into a dramatic saga involving enchanted forests, magical winds, and a duel with a tree spirit. The woman, understandably confused, arrived to find masked dancers swirling around a wooden prop meant to represent her aura, while the storyteller narrated her daily routine like it was an epic prophecy. Halfway through, a costumed spirit tripped on its own robe, knocking over the scenery and sending the entire troupe tumbling in a domino collapse. As dust rose, the suitor stood proudly amid the chaos, expecting to be praised for his creativity, while she quietly contemplated how far someone must travel to find a relationship with fewer interpretive dances. The effort was impressive, but romance shouldn't require audience participation. 11. A devoted craft enthusiast once decided that the ultimate sign of affection was carving a life-size wooden statue of his beloved, complete with a dramatic pose and what he believed was a flattering expression. Unfortunately, wood carving is an unforgiving medium, and the final result looked less like a heartfelt likeness and more like a mildly haunted mannequin auditioning for a horror play. Undeterred, he presented the statue outside her home at sunrise, which caused her neighbors to react as if an omen had been planted on their street. Local dogs refused to walk near it, children pointed and screamed, and the woman herself politely suggested he consider hobbies that didn't involve creating wooden doppelgangers. The statue was later repurposed as a scarecrow, where it performed admirably despite being far more frightening to humans than birds. Nothing undermines romance like accidentally crafting a cursed effigy of someone you admire. 12. A young scribe once attempted to woo his crush by rewriting an entire epic poem with her name inserted into every heroic passage, transforming a national classic into an aggressively customized fan edition. He proudly recited it aloud in the marketplace, unaware that the poem's original author was considered sacred and its recitation regulated by local tradition. By the time he reached the verse in which she was compared to a thunder-kissed lioness riding upon destiny's chariot, a group of scholarly elders had already gathered to issue a formal reprimand. His beloved stood nearby, mortified that he had unintentionally triggered a literary inquisition on her behalf. He concluded the reading with a flourish, only to be escorted away for poetic misconduct, while she avoided eye contact with everyone for weeks. It turns out some people appreciate compliments, but not when delivered in the form of a cultural misdemeanor. 13. Historical displays of wealth often involved questionable decisions, but none quite like the merchant who attempted to impress a potential partner by lighting hundreds of oil lamps along the shoreline to spell her name, transforming the beach into a flickering banner of devotion that impressed everyone until a gust of wind arrived with malicious timing. Within minutes, half the lamps toppled into the sand, igniting dry seaweed and starting a sizable fire that turned his romantic gesture into an impromptu emergency drill. Townspeople rushed to douse the flames while he tried to explain that the blazing inferno was symbolic, a statement that did not convince anyone, especially the woman whose name was literally burning across the waterfront. She reportedly told him she preferred subtlety, preferably the kind that didn't require a firefighting team. His attempt went down in flames, both figuratively and very literally. 14. A starry-eyed apprentice herbalist once created a scent of pure devotion, a perfume meant to capture the essence of his affection, except his aromatic skills were questionable, and his ingredient list resembled a witch's shopping spree. Rose oil, cinnamon, crushed myrrh, and several substances described by colleagues as aggressively organic. The final product emitted a smell so potent that it caused immediate sneezing fits in anyone within a 5-foot radius. When he gifted a vial of the perfume to his beloved, she dabbed a single drop on her wrist and instantly triggered a coughing chain reaction across the entire room. He begged her to keep it, insisting the scent bloomed over time. But witnesses reported that it bloomed primarily into something resembling weaponized soup. She kindly declined further gifts involving fumes, while he quietly retired from perfumery for the sake of public safety. 15. Courtship letters can be charming, but one ambitious romantic turned his into a full espionage operation by attempting to secretly place a love note into the pocket of his crush during a crowded festival. He practiced the maneuver for days, convinced he could pull off a covert delivery worthy of a spy novel. But when the moment arrived, he misjudged the crowd's movement and instead slipped the letter into the pocket of her father, a notoriously stern man known for arresting people on suspicion alone. The father discovered the note later that night and confronted the suitor, who panicked and claimed it was part of a surprise moral improvement project that required anonymous compliments. The explanation fooled no one, especially when the intended recipient flatly stated she preferred conversations that did not involve pickpocket-adjacent behavior. Romance wasn't dead, but it certainly had grounds to file a complaint. 16. Storming into romance with the confidence of a man who had clearly never met consequences, one aspiring knight invented a grand tournament of love overnight and challenged every eligible bachelor in town to duel for the privilege of delivering his poem. But his rules made so little sense that participants ignored them entirely and proceeded to bludgeon each other with wooden swords while he hobbled around shouting contradictory directions. He grew so excited, cheering for his own brilliance, that he jumped, twisted his ankle, and fell onto the podium he'd built from unstable crates. By the time the chaos died down, the woman glanced at the battered competitors, the toppled banner, and the knight curled in pain and politely declined the poem after hearing it compared her beauty to the tax burden of a nation, which ended the tournament and any hope of romance in a single sentence. 17. Announcing his feelings with the subtlety of an exploding boiler, a love-struck apprentice clockmaker unveiled a mechanical singing bird that was supposed to serenade his sweetheart at dawn, except the mechanism malfunctioned instantly and emitted a shriek so nightmarish it caused two neighbors to drop their breakfast bowls. The metal creature flapped its wings with violent spasms, spit springs across the courtyard, launched itself into a chimney, and filled the air with smoke and regret. His beloved opened her window to witness the mechanical meltdown just as the bird rattled free and crashed onto a rooftop, like an omen no one ordered. He tried to insist it had been programmed with emotional resonance, but she seemed unconvinced, especially as the bird continued wheezing from the gutter like a dying kettle. Her final remark, that the gesture was unignorable, was the politest insult the neighborhood had ever recorded. 18. Leaping enthusiastically into bad ideas, a young noble decided to prove his devotion through a week-long fast, claiming that love alone would nourish him, which proved inaccurate within hours as he fainted theatrically into a basket of oysters he'd been walking past. The allergic reaction that followed ensured he spent the next day swollen, confused, and repeatedly apologizing to medical staff for believing emotions could replace nutrition. When his beloved arrived, he attempted a grand romantic declaration, but it was swiftly overshadowed by the doctor explaining, in the gentlest possible tone, that the only reason he was upright was broth and sheer medical professionalism. She wished him well but admitted the gesture made her fear he'd propose marriage using a stunt involving dehydration or possibly heat exhaustion. The noble left the ordeal with a renewed admiration for food and a diminished belief in symbolic starvation. 19. Attempting to merge horticulture with romance, a wealthy landowner designed an enormous hedge maze shaped like the initials of the woman he admired, then invited her for a walk of destiny, without warning her that the labyrinth required actual navigation skills. Within minutes, she was trapped among identical greenery, while he shouted useless philosophical guidance like, "Follow the pathways of the heart," and "Seek your inner truth," which translated poorly into directional assistance. Eventually, a gardener had to rescue her with a ladder, while the landowner tried to downplay the fiasco as a metaphor she wasn't yet ready to understand. The maze later became a local attraction for people who enjoyed experiencing the architectural consequences of unchecked egotism. The woman declined future invitations involving hedges, initials, or anything that could require emergency extraction. 20. Diving confidently into animal-based romance, a traveling merchant purchased what he believed was an exotic miniature hound symbolizing loyalty, unaware that the creature was actually a furious badger dyed an optimistic shade of brown. When he presented the rare companion as a romantic gesture, it immediately escaped his grasp, shredded the curtains, overturned a valuable ceramic bowl, and chased two guests down the corridor with the energy of a creature committed to vengeance. The woman he hoped to impress climbed onto a chair while he attempted to coax the badger using soft whispers and fear-induced negotiation, both of which the animal interpreted as personal attacks. The date ended with the merchant receiving medical attention, the badger fleeing triumphantly into the night, and the woman vowing never to date anyone who purchased pets in alleys. 21. Determined to show poetic devotion, a scholar delivered an impassioned love speech at a public forum reserved strictly for agricultural announcements, leaving a crowd of farmers deeply confused as he launched into metaphors about destiny, phoenixes, and cosmic longing. The woman he adored arrived just in time to hear her name shouted with such overwhelming intensity that a goat fainted and a horse attempted to leave the square. Several farmers tried to politely steer the scholar off stage so they could return to discussing irrigation schedules, but he continued reciting as if auditioning for a mythological opera. When he finally concluded, breathless and triumphant, his beloved suggested they discuss personal matters in a setting that did not involve livestock, fainting goats, or publicly bewildered farmers. 22. Charging into romance like a man who trusted folklore more than reality, a fisherman attempted to catch a legendary shimmering river creature to gift to his beloved, only to haul in an enormous catfish with the personality of an irritable bar bouncer. He strutted toward town holding the creature proudly until it thrashed with enough force to drag him face first through the mud like a mop being punished for insubordination. By the time he reached her doorstep, covered in filth and half drowned, the catfish launched itself free, demolished a vegetable cart, and swam triumphantly back toward the river. The woman thanked him for the effort, but suggested perhaps future tokens of affection not involve aquatic violence or potential lawsuits from vendors. 23. Fueled by artistic ambition and a tragic lack of artistic ability, an amateur sculptor carved his beloved's portrait into a massive cliffside, revealing it during a community picnic with the confidence of a man unaware that the sculpture resembled a melted scarecrow contemplating its existence. Townspeople stared in uncomfortable silence as he explained each lopsided feature, while birds began nesting inside the hollowed eye sockets, as if claiming the artwork for nature itself. His beloved attempted politeness, but could only ask whether the sculpture was still drying, a phrase that later became the local shorthand for any romantic gesture that went catastrophically wrong. Eventually, the town begged him to stop improving it for fear the cliff would become even more expressive. 24. Sprinting toward love with a reckless mix of fire and optimism, a young horseman attempted to impress his beloved by juggling lit torches while riding past her home, a stunt he believed symbolized passion and courage. Unfortunately, his cloak caught fire instantly, turning the performance into a chaotic tumble of flames, panic, and regrettable acrobatics. He fell from the horse, rolled into a puddle, and extinguished himself with all the grace of a man trapped inside a burning laundry pile. His beloved watched from the window wearing the expression of someone reconsidering her entire social circle. Neighbors helped him stand while advising him to avoid combining combustion with romance, a combination the horse seemed to have already understood as it walked home alone. 25. Attempting a sweet proposal, a baker hid a ring inside a cake without labeling it, resulting in a stranger unknowingly consuming half an engagement plan and assuming destiny was at work. When word spread that someone had found a ring in a pastry, the baker spent the afternoon sprinting across town trying to retrieve the misplaced symbol of love, while the intended recipient listened to the developing chaos with the calm resignation of someone rethinking their standards. The ring changed hands so many times that returning it felt like repatriating a cultural artifact. The baker eventually proposed with a different ring and a strict no-baked goods rule. 26. Hoping to prove his musical charm, a farmer performed a love ballad atop a hay wagon at the village festival, but a sudden gust of wind scattered his handwritten lyrics across the crowd, forcing him to improvise lines comparing his beloved to a reliable ox of emotional stability, a metaphor no one requested. The wagon began rolling downhill mid-performance, transforming the serenade into a slow-moving chase scene as he clung to a pitchfork for balance while continuing to sing in sheer defiance of gravity. The song concluded inside a beanstalk where applause mixed with concern and a collective request that he rehearse next time on solid ground. 27. Treating romance like a cryptographic challenge, a scholar wrote an elaborate coded confession filled with bizarre symbols and secret patterns, forgetting entirely to provide his beloved with the decoding key. She interpreted the message as either a treasure map or a warning from an obscure cult and delivered it to a historian, who initiated a brief but deeply unnecessary investigation. Meanwhile, the scholar waited happily for her response, unaware half the town was trying to translate his overwrought emotional puzzle. When she finally learned the message's mundane contents, she gently suggested he express affection using words, not encrypted anxiety. 28. Attempting the culinary equivalent of emotional overkill, a chef recreated every dish his beloved had ever mentioned liking, assembling a buffet that looked like the menu of a ship unsure of its destination. Each dish collided with the next in a spiral of collapsing pastries, spreading sauces, and aggressively incompatible flavors. His beloved attempted to taste everything but gradually lost the will to smile as the gastronomic avalanche overwhelmed her senses. By the finale, she suggested that perhaps affection could be demonstrated through a single well-chosen dish rather than a desperate food-based reenactment of world history. 29. Believing attentiveness equaled romance, a well-meaning scholar compiled a detailed observational journal documenting his beloved's daily habits, from the way she folded pages to the rhythm of her footsteps, producing a manuscript that read less like love and more like a field study conducted by a zoologist with too much free time. When he presented the journal, she flipped through the behavioral annotations with the composed confusion of someone reading their own surveillance report. She recommended he redirect his academic energy towards studying rocks before politely distancing herself from his scientific enthusiasm. 30. Attempting a picturesque outdoor date, a young aristocrat arranged an elaborate picnic in a meadow known for its scenic beauty and, for reasons he had somehow overlooked, its highly motivated goat population. Moments after he unveiled the food, the goats launched a coordinated raid, devouring pastries, stealing linens, and treating his love poem as edible literature. As the couple retreated with whatever food remained, the goats continued their assault with the precision of a well-trained heist crew. His beloved later described the outing as memorable, though not in the romantic sense he had intended. 31. Creating symbolic unity rings seemed like a sweet idea until a blacksmith forged two massive iron circles so heavy they required teamwork just to lift. During the ceremonial demonstration, he insisted they raise the rings together, but the weight sent them rolling downhill like runaway industrial hula hoops, destroying flower pots and nearly taking out the ceremonial arch. The crowd scattered as the rings clanged through the garden, and his beloved, catching her breath, gently suggested their relationship did not require equipment capable of property damage. The rings were eventually repurposed as mill components, where they served a far safer purpose. And that's our tour of history's most dedicated, romantically confused humans. Drop your pick for the dumbest stunt in the comments, because trust me, the competition is brutally close.